Hey, welcome to 1500 ESPN. I'm Derek Wetmore. This is Andrew Kramer. We just got done watching the Vikings-Saints game where New Orleans won in New Orleans 20-9. The big story of the game, of course, Teddy Bridgewater takes over for an injured Matt Cassel. We'll talk about that on this video. We'll also talk about key Vikings injuries. We'll talk about how Adrian Peterson's how his absence impacted the game. And then we'll also talk about kind of a game-changing penalty for the Vikings. We'll expound on all of this stuff, too, on a Purple podcast immediately after the video. So check the show page. Up at the top of the page, go to shows, drag down to Purple podcast, and we'll have a full podcast posted there. What do we usually go, 30 minutes or so?
Something like that, yeah.
It'll be around there. So the first things first, Andrew. Teddy Bridgewater makes basically his NFL debut today. It wasn't a start, but he came in for the injured Matt Cassel early in the second quarter. How did that impact the team, and what did you think of Teddy's performance?
Well, I thought Teddy did well for being thrown into a game that he really wasn't game planning to be a starter at all. Obviously, he's taking reps in practice, and you're getting to see what the game plan is, but you're not the one who's actually installing it and running it in practices. So for him to be thrown into this situation, I thought this would be the worst case possible for Teddy. I thought he'd be better off, being named a starter for the week going into a game, but he played well going into it. I thought 12 for 20 for 150 yards. He ran for a few too, picked up some first downs. The biggest thing I saw with him was when pressure, because the Vikings offensive line, make no mistakes, no matter who was the quarterback, the Vikings offensive line did not play well in this game. And so with Teddy, what the Vikings offense was able to do is he was a little more mobile. And Mike Zimmer said it after the game. He was able to actually move around and pick up some first downs, make some reads on the run. That was good to see from a rookie quarterback, not panicking and not making any kind of major mistakes. There were no interceptions and no turnovers for the Vikings in this game, but it didn't matter because they still weren't able to get anything going on the ground, and that didn't help either quarterback. And like I said, they were getting hit. The quarterbacks were getting hit all game.
Big reason the ground game isn't present is Adrian Peterson, obviously, basically indefinitely suspended from the team. You know that all about that whole situation with his ongoing legal situation. But just from a football perspective, how did that affect the Vikings today, and what did they try to do with Matt Cassel and a little bit of Jerick McKinnon to sort of mitigate the loss of Peterson?
Well, they really wanted to get the running backs involved in the passing game, which is great and all, and it works theoretically, but when you're not getting anything going in the passing game in general or with your running game, they ran to Cordero Patterson once early on for a 7-yard loss and then never went back to it, which to me was surprising because you shouldn't get scared away from a home run threat like that just because one play blew up early. And I believe it was on their first drive too, so I was surprised to see that. But the Vikings really tried to keep things going vertically, obviously, because they were down for one score most of the game and then 2 scores late. You saw Greg Jennings with a few completions, which is good to see with Bridgewater getting that rapport going. But outside of that, there wasn't much positive to glean from this Vikings offense, who, like I said, struggled getting Kyle Rudolph involved before he left with a groin injury. And then you've got their running game who's just not getting anything going with Matt Cassel. Both tackles, and Matt Khalil and Phil Loadholt, struggled. Brandon Fusco left with an injury, so you had Vlad Dukas come in, and he gets flagged for 2 penalties and can't get anything going. Really, this Vikings offensive unit struggled as a whole, and even this quarterback switch doesn't mean this is going to all of a sudden revive any kind of offense that they had. Sure. They just can't get much going regardless of who the quarterback is, and so this is going to be a rebuilding project regardless of if it's Cassel or Teddy. And with this prognosis of Cassel being several fractures in his foot, this is Teddy's team going forward, and I would be surprised to see Matt Cassel on the field anytime soon.
Yeah, so you mentioned the several fractured bones in Matt Cassel's foot, as Mike Zimmer said in his post-game press conference posted on the Vikings website. You got Cassel, you mentioned Rudolph out with a groin, you mentioned Fusco. What are some of the other Vikings injuries? And then we'll get to that kind of game-changing play, the penalty on on the Vikings against Drew Brees.
Yeah, well, defensively, Josh Robinson ended up leaving the game with a hamstring injury, which, again, it's the same old, same old. He's a guy that missed time in the offseason, in the preseason, with the same injury. We don't know if it's the same hamstring or not, but it's still a hamstring injury. And for a cornerback, those are hamstring and groins are specific injuries that you need to nurse quite a bit for a defensive back. And so their depth goes right to a rookie and 7th-round pick Jabari Price, which is struggling to say the least when it comes to this Vikings defense. And so moving forward, you had Chad Greenway also leave the game with what Mike Zimmer said was a rib injury, and he's already playing hurt with a broken left hand. And so that forces Gerald Hodges, your second-year linebacker, into the starting duty. in their base and nickel packages. So you're seeing this depth getting worn thin just because their starters aren't able to stay healthy on defense. And then, of course, you get the one unnecessary roughness penalty on Captain Munnerlyn that really put him behind.
I wanted to talk about that briefly because it was a play where Blanton and Robert Blanton and Munnerlyn sort of met at the quarterback. Yep. And it was a sack in a critical spot in the game for the Vikings to make a big defensive stop. And they slammed him to the ground. Now, I think the play kind of could go either way, but in the NFL, they're protecting the quarterbacks. They're especially protecting a quarterback like Drew Brees. So when he got slammed to the ground and the Vikings got called for an unnecessary roughness, my view is that it could have gone either way, and it was a bad break for the Vikings that it went against them. What did you think about that play? And then, obviously, the impact that it had in the game. I'll let you touch on that, too.
This is 2014 officiating at its finest, really. I disagree wholeheartedly with a play like this, no matter who it would have been called on. If they would have called that a slam on Teddy Bridgewater from New Orleans Saints, I would have thought that would be ticky-tack because, listen, a few years back, this was not a penalty. Yeah. The whistle was not blown. The play was live. Captain didn't throw him down after the whistle. This wasn't a late
because there was some thought that it could have been forward progress was called, but they didn't blow
the whistle. That's the key here. The play was still live, and they basically called, as they flagged it, unnecessary roughness, meaning you just can't throw the quarterback to the turf like that. Mm-hmm. To me, that's a BS call just because you have a guy in Drew Brees who can still get rid of the ball when he's being held up like that, and you want to make sure he gets to the turf. So, but again, Mike Zimmer said it post-game, you can't throw the quarterback to the turf like that. That's 2014 officiating. Mike Zimmer knows it, Captain Munnerlyn knows it, and we know it, and that's why that flag was thrown.
So it was a big situation for the Vikings. The Saints end up getting an automatic first down and then marching and scoring a touchdown that basically put the game out of reach a little bit.
That's really what it was. Again, you can't put it all on the penalty because they had chances to end the drive after that, but the Saints marched down and scored, and that's what put it at the score at 20-9. And really, you gave Teddy Bridgewater then with half a quarter left to try and come back, and that just wasn't going to happen for a Vikings offense that, as we mentioned earlier, couldn't get much going to begin with when it was Cassel, and then when Teddy was in there. Really, it's just damage control. You want to get the rookie comfortable. You're not expecting him to win the game for you, and that's what happened.
Tough sledding for the Vikings in New Orleans against the Saints as they lose 20-9. Let's record a Purple podcast, huh?
Let's do it. Sounds like a plan.
So, again, like I said, check the show page. Go up there, scroll down to Vikings Purple Podcast. Andrew and I will have the full breakdown. For Andrew Kramer, I'm Derek Wetmore. Thanks for checking the website, 1500ESPN.com.